rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to our latest lecture on this, inshallah, series that you find relevant and even maybe exciting and fascinating, which has to do with the afterlife and what awaits us for, inshallah, all eternity. That in our case we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be a happy and joyous one. So we are at this lesson, for those of you who have been following from the beginning, based on the curriculum, we are at lesson 45. And in this series, this lesson has to do with the proving and seeing what the Qur'an has to say on the topic of the resurrection or the afterlife in the Holy Qur'an specifically. So until now, what we did is that we concentrated a little bit more on the rational components, as we shall see in a moment when we do our recap. And now we have we're going to switch to more scriptural evidence for everything that we have said related to the afterlife, related to the possibility and necessity of the resurrection that will take place in the afterlife. So the manner in which this lesson is structured, there is an introduction after which the author explains that those who have denied the afterlife in general have not done so based on actual proofs, actual evidence or arguments. This is not based on logic. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's based on a lack of knowledge, a lack of evidence. And of course, this is based on the Holy Qur'an. And then we are going to, as part of this lesson, see a number of examples provided by the Holy Qur'an to show us that this thing that is considered, almost an impossibility by some, those who want to deny, in fact, not only is it possible, but that we are surrounded by it on a very routinely, ordinary, regular basis as human beings, and that there are many instances of a miniature form of a resurrection that have taken place and that continue to take place around us. So with a little bit of contemplation, a human being should be able to see that this topic of resurrection is really not this impossible thing that the deniers have made it out to be. So generally speaking, the author is going to concentrate on 4 specific examples from the, categories of examples from the Holy Quran. The first one having to do with how nature comes back to life. And this is specifically related to the plant world, as it's referred to. But the truth is, if you look at those verses, you'll see that they go beyond just the plant world to nature in general, with its cycles, with its seasons, with its kind of like the circle of life notion that things die or they go into some sort of hibernation and then they come back to life. So this is one area or one type of example that's mentioned. And then the example of the people of the cave. So we'll talk about that example in the Holy Quran. And then we'll see examples where the Holy Quran talks about animals that have been brought back from the dead, resurrected. And finally, the resurrection of specific individuals. So people who have been brought back from the dead. So there's kind of an evolution here where we go from things that are, more mundane and more regular and more ordinary to the things that are more extraordinary and more maybe fantastic, all the way to the human being itself, who is actually being resurrected and coming back from the dead. So as part of this introduction, maybe we can start with a very quick recap. So what we've said until now, we began by explaining and making sure that we have clarity on this notion of the afterlife and the importance that the understanding the afterlife, understanding all the subtopics under the theme of the afterlife, the hereafter, what awaits us after death, is very determining for a human being to live a fully human life to be able to have a full worldview, you need to find your position and know your truth with regards to the afterlife. This is going to be determining for you so that you have a full worldview, and this is what's going to dictate and give direction and give orientation to the manner in which you're going to live as a human being. Once that was out of the way, we spent time looking at one of the premises on which the entire topic of the afterlife is going to be built. So the author decided to talk about this right from the beginning as a first subtopic under the afterlife, to see how do we talk about an afterlife if we are not clear, we are not sure yet about the existence of a soul. So he began by explaining, or we began by kind of taking this quick journey into what is the soul, how do we prove its existence, and why is it important. And basically the sum total of everything we presented there is that for a human being to know who they truly are, we have to look at their soul. The soul is what is going to determine your true identity in the sense of who you truly are, your real personality, the real you. And it's also going to be that thing which holds you together as one unit, despite all the changes that take place and occur to you and to your life and to your body throughout your life. And what we take from all of this is that the moment this body takes its last breath in this world and dies, everything does not stop then. Because there is a soul, because there is an immaterial soul that is not divisible, that is not destructible, just like the body is, then we have something that is going to continue to exist. The real you is going to continue to exist, despite the fact that it no longer has the body that it had to interact with this material world. And we looked at some of the traits of that soul, and we said that this is going to be important for the subsequent lectures and lessons and subtopics that we're going to have under the big heading of the afterlife. With all of that out of the way, now we want to start looking at the afterlife itself. Why do we need an afterlife? Why do we need a life, after this world? And we gave two big proofs, although, we gave a lot of variants to them. And we said basically that we established the necessity of an afterlife based on reason on two main arguments. The first one having to do with divine wisdom, and the second one having to do with divine justice. So with all of that out of the way, now we turn our attention, now that we did all of this based on reason, we turn our attention to the scripture. We want to turn our attention to the Holy Qur'an to see, so what does the Holy Qur'an say about the topic of resurrection and the afterlife? Now, keep in mind that this is not going to be the only lesson. There's, a couple more lessons related to this topic. So for it to be fully understood, you'll have to wait. But generally speaking, from a Quranic point of view, we're going to give the kind of the lay of the land today very quickly, and then we're going to build on this. So the author tells us, and this is his way of classifying or categorizing the verses of the Holy Quran. He presents a categorization of the verses of the Holy Quran that have to do with this topic of proving the afterlife or resurrection based on 5 categories. So we are told that if we look at the verses having to do with proving the resurrection and the afterlife, we're going to find a first category of verses that has to do with those who want to deny the resurrection, who want to say there is no resurrection, there is no afterlife. But in truth, when they're asked, when they're pushed to provide evidence, to provide an argument for their belief or for their denial, they can't produce any. And so this is a first point, and we find this in a number of verses of the Holy Quran, this point being made that those who are denying, they are not denying based on any rational, logical evidence. Okay, so once this is out of the way, then a second category of the verses of the Holy Quran is going to come to present a number of phenomena that we encounter in our day-to-day lives, that we have known about, that we're sure about, that should take this impossibility that we heard about in the first group of verses, the impossibility of the resurrection and the afterlife, out of the equation. So that we know not only is there no proof, but now we are encountering many examples of our lives as human beings that there is resurrection that is actually taking place. And so therefore, not only is it impossible, but very similar traits that we find in the resurrection of the afterlife are found. So the next group of verses has to do with the direct answers from the Holy Qur'an to those who have been objecting to some of the arguments presented by the Holy Qur'an regarding the resurrection and the afterlife. The fourth group of verses related to this topic in the Holy Qur'an have to do with the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made a promise, has committed to ensuring that there is going to be a resurrection and an afterlife. That's a fourth group of verses. And the last group of verses, the fifth group, the fifth category, has to do with verses of the Holy Qur'an that themselves contain rational arguments for establishing the necessity of the resurrection and the afterlife. So in one way, I thought maybe, if we look at this, it just looks like it's very disparate or disconnected groups or categories. It might be a little bit difficult to remember. There is a logic to this. So it's not really presented in this way in the lesson, but if we put this in a certain way and we present it in the right way, basically this is how the argument goes. The Holy Qur'an is trying to guide humanity. And then, of course, there are those who are going to deny and those who are going to disbelieve and those who are going to object. So the Holy Qur'an goes directly to them. And it establishes a rule that is actually applied everywhere else for all major beliefs, for all important things in the Holy Qur'an, as we shall see. And it applies it to them, which is, if you deny, you need to provide a proof. You need to show that you have evidence, that you have a clear, logical, convincing argument for whatever you're believing or not believing. If you deny, then you need an argument for why you're denying. If you do, if you don't do, if you believe, if you don't believe, the Holy Qur'an is demanding an argument, is demanding an actual proof from you. Otherwise, it doesn't consider your position worthy of respect, right? You're not really utilizing your human faculty, your human intellect. So your position is really not a respectable one. Once this is out of its way, the Holy Qur'an is basically disarming. It's taking out of the equation this notion that you can deny based on any logical foundation or logical proof. The Holy Qur'an shows that there is no proof for the impossibility of the resurrection or the afterlife. Once this is out of the way, the Holy Qur'an basically proceeds to say, okay, so now that we're sure that the impossibility cannot be established, therefore in theory it is possible, allow us to show you examples where this is actually taking place. So the examples are provided. Now anyone who sees the examples should say, okay, well, therefore resurrection is a possibility. The afterlife is a possibility. It no longer is impossible. It is possible. Except that every time you look at an example, and this is how examples work, you might find a weakness in the example because it's not the thing in itself. It's an analogy. It's similar to, but there's always something different. So you may attack that difference and say, and because of this difference, you can't use this example, therefore it won't occur. So the Holy Qur'an comes back and answers some of those objections that one may think of, or that were actually presented by those who rejected some of the examples presented by the Holy Qur'an. So once those objections are replied to, then the Holy Qur'an goes on the attack. So this is where you see that there are kind of two different categories of verses. The verses in points 1 and 2 are really about establishing the possibility of the afterlife and the resurrection. It's about the fact that the resurrection is possible. No one can come back and deny this. No one can say that this is impossible, that it doesn't make sense, that it's not logical. The Holy Qur'an takes all of this out of the equation. And then it turns the strategy, and it goes on the attack, and then it shows that there are actual proofs that not only establish that it is possible, but that it is actually necessary, that there is a resurrection and that there is an afterlife. So this is in addition to the rational argumentation that we've presented until now. So the first proof that the Holy Quran presents is going to be, as we will present it, is going to be that there are verses that promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you believe that there is a God, if you believe that there is a truthful claim, someone who makes a claim and they are truthful, if someone comes and you trust them, they're reliable, they're trustworthy, and they tell you something, then you're supposed to believe them. This is the position by default. You need a reason why not to believe someone who is supposed to be truthful. So if Allah or the Holy Prophet or the Holy Quran says that there is an afterlife and that there is a resurrection, that in itself becomes an argument. This is the divine promise argument. And we mentioned it or alluded to it in the last time we met. And then the last group of verses of the Holy Quran, so again, following the same logic, the last group is going to present rational arguments contained in verses of the Holy Quran. So, as we said, the first 2 points, that there is no proof for the impossibility, for the denial, and 2, that there are phenomena similar to the afterlife, and this has to do with the possibility of the afterlife and the resurrection, is going to be what we cover today. This is today's lesson. The rest of the points are going to be covered in the next lesson and the one after, for the next 2 lessons or so. And then when we move to the last one, to the last point, which has to do with the last category, which has to do with the verses of the Holy Quran that contain arguments. Here may be a very quick point that sometimes I think when we want to be very methodological, we want to be very accurate in our argumentation and our proofs, we think that we cannot use the Holy Quran at all if we're debating, let's say, with someone who doesn't believe in the Holy Quran. And that's actually not entirely accurate. There are verses, everything depends on the argument being made by the verse that you're using. There are verses in the Holy Quran that rely on the authority of the Quran itself, or that rely on the authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the authenticity of the Holy Prophet to establish something. You basically have to believe something because God said so. Okay, so if you do not believe in God, then that argument doesn't work. But there are other verses of the Holy Quran that do not establish their conclusion, their argument is not based just on the authority that this is the Quran and it's said by God. They actually present a logical argument that you could write in a philosophical or logical argumentation. You can build premises and conclusions. And those verses of the Holy Quran can always be used, whether you believe or not in the Holy Quran. So if you do believe, then this is an additional layer to your argument that it's also mentioned in the Holy Quran as a valid. It only adds to the validity of the argument and to the weight of the argument. Otherwise, when we say that we're going to present rational verses of the Quran that have rational arguments for anything, in this case, resurrection of the afterlife, it doesn't mean that we're only going to rely on the scriptural authenticity, that this is from Allah and this is from the Holy Prophet and this is authentic. Beyond that, it also contains its own argumentation and its own logic, which is worthy of being looked at philosophically and logically. Okay, so this is what we wanted to say for the introduction. Let's start with the first point. So the first point, as we said, has to do with those people that deny the afterlife. They deny the resurrection because they say that it is basically something impossible, that their mind cannot comprehend. It doesn't make any sense for someone to believe that they are going to be, after they die, that they're going to be resurrected and they're going to live in an afterlife. So as a general rule, as we said, when the Holy Quran comes to anything that is of importance, it wants its followers, it wants the people that it has a dialogue with, whether they are its followers or not, to be people who respect the intellect, who respect the weight that is given to actual proofs and arguments and evidence. The Holy Quran doesn't have a lot of patience and a lot of room and doesn't give a lot of space for people who do not want to base their actions or their beliefs on something that is baseless, that is without foundation, where there's no very clear, convincing logic that everybody who can hear it or see it agrees with. Okay, so the Holy Quran is very clear. When you engage with the Holy Quran, you have to be ready to come with your proofs, because the Holy Quran is going to come with arguments and proofs. And if you don't have any, it's going to dismiss you very quickly. And this is something that, generally speaking, should be universal, instinctive. Human beings want everything to be based on reason and based on intellect and based on logic. And people, they claim very big claims nowadays, especially for people who follow science and who give a lot of room and space to scientific thought, that apparently everything is based on good logic and scientific method and so on and so forth. Everybody claims this. In Arabic they have this the saying that نحن أصحاب الدليل أينما مال نميل. We are followers of the proof. Wherever it may lean, we lean with it. But that's what everybody claims. It's a cheap and easy claim until we see how you actually interact and deal with evidence when evidence is actually presented. In any case, why does the Holy Quran do this? Why this insistence on evidence and on proofs? The first reason is that this is how truth is established. Truth can only be established based on evidence. And this should go without saying. It's kind of instinctively and understood by human beings. The second reason is it's a strategy. Because this is those that are attacking the Holy Quran and those who deny and those who are stubborn, whether it was at the time of the Holy Prophet when the Holy Quran was being communicated, or today or at any point in history, those who deny, they make a lot of noise. They may seem to be very forceful and very confident, and they have a lot to say, and it's all based on foundations. And so the Holy Quran attacks directly at the core. And it says, if you claim that what you're saying, if you claim that it's the truth, then provide evidence for it. What is your evidence, so that we can look at it, so that we can contemplate it and study it and analyze it? Without evidence, we can dismiss quickly. So this is a general rule that the Holy Quran establishes. And usually those who deny and those who object and those who stubbornly reject the truths in the scriptures, especially in the Holy Quran tells us, are going to be the ones who live and who make those decisions based on assumptions, based on guesswork, on suspicion, on conjecture, but they have no certainty. Everything is based on maybe this, maybe that. And so the Holy Quran considers all of that guesswork that is completely non-valid for things like beliefs and worldviews and the manner in which you're supposed to live. And so many verses of the Holy Quran establish this as a rule. Say, produce your evidence should you be truthful. If you claim to say the truth, to have the truth, then provide your evidence. We find this in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 111, again in 21:24, 27:64. It's always the same line of argumentation. The verse says, or have they taken gods beside him, beside Allah? Say, bring your evidence. This is precept of those who are with me and a precept of those who went before me. Rather, most of them do not know the truth, and so they turn away. In another verse it says, 27:64, is he who has originated the creation, then he will bring it back, and who provides for you from the sky and the earth. What, is there a God besides Allah? Say, bring your evidence should you be truthful. So this is a line of argumentation that we find throughout the Holy Quran. Now, if we look at the verses, the groups, the sets of verses that talk about this, there is no less than 15 to 20 sets or groups of verses that directly address this issue in all sorts of different ways. And the Holy Quran uses this, as we said, for all things that are of importance. Examples of this are, for instance, when people ascribe partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a son. When they say that the jinn are partners to Allah. For some of the beliefs that people hold. In all of these cases, the Quran is always going to say, if you're truthful in this claim, then provide evidence for it. Okay? And we're going to see for some of those, we have a few examples. Or people who just decide that they're entitled to simply following their own desires in this world. The Holy Quran says you can't just do that. For you to act in a certain way or not, you need evidence. What is your evidence? Okay? When they claimed that they had crucified or killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, peace upon him, the Holy Quran says, bring evidence for this. naming the angels because they considered them as females and they're the daughters of Allah. So, and so they used to name them with female names. The Quran says, bring proof for this. When Fir'aun denied that Musa was actually someone who had come with a message from Allah, he said, I think that he's not saying the truth. This is a very clear argument from the Holy Quran that Fir'aun did not have an argument. All he had was a conjecture. He tells Haman, I think he's not telling the truth. Why don't you build me this big, large structure, and I'm going to start looking for God through it, the God of Musa, and if I don't find him, then, that basically validates what I think, which is he's lying, for instance. And there are many other examples in the Quran like this. So a few verses of the Quran that talk about this directly. Verse 6, 148, it says, the polytheists will say, had Allah wished, we would not have ascribed any partner to him, nor our fathers, nor would we have forbidden anything. Those who were before them had denied likewise until they tasted our punishment. Say, do you have any revealed knowledge that you can produce before us for your claim? So this is a claim related to their belief that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can decide. But so long as he has not decided to prevent us from worshipping, then, it's okay for us to worship. Allah is not preventing us. So this is, Allah says, you need to provide proof for this claim. You follow nothing but conjectures and you do nothing but lie. 30:29, it says, rather the wrongdoers follow their own desires without any knowledge. In verse 31:20, do you not see that Allah has disposed for you whatever there is in the heavens and whatever there is in the earth, and he has showered upon you his blessings, the outward and the inward? Yet among the people are those who dispute concerning Allah without knowledge or guidance or an illuminating scripture. See, so it's based on nothing. They argue, but when you go to their argument, you see there is no evidence in it. In verses 27 to 28, chapter 53, it says, indeed, those who do not believe in the hereafter give female names to the angels. They do not have any knowledge of that. They follow nothing but conjecture, and surely conjecture does not avail against the truth, has no value against the truth. You see the importance that the Holy Quran gives to the truth. If you come to it, then you have to respect it enough to provide real evidence for it. And then the Quran continues and says, we're now going to take this principle that we've established, that you need to provide evidence, and apply it to the afterlife. And so it says, and they say, there is nothing but the life of this world. We die and we come to life, and nothing destroys us but time. And we mentioned this verse. Those are the people who basically say, we exist only in this world. And this is what we have nowadays. Dahriyin, people who believe that we only live in this world, and that it's a material world and there's nothing beyond it, nothing before and nothing after. We die and we come to life, and nothing destroys us but time. But they do not have any knowledge of that. They only make conjectures. And here I just added very quickly, because this is a verse where I've received a lot of questions with time about, why does the verse say, in Arabic it says, namutu wa nahya. So why does it say, death before coming to life? And there's a number of in the commentaries, a number of explanations have been given. The first is that grammatically, the waw here does not mean any order. There's no sequence here that death is before life. It's happening. It just means that both are happening. That's grammatically. Secondly, it could mean that we are alive. So we are going to die and other people are going to come to life. Okay, so that's all it means. Another version or another interpretation could simply be that those and some of the Arabs did believe in reincarnation. So we're alive, we're going to die, and then we're going to come back to life, but it's always in this world. We're going to come back into another body, and so on and so forth. And some have said they meant symbolically. So we die, and then what lives on is our lineage, our ancestry, right? Or what lives on is more symbolic than that, the works that we leave behind, and the battles that we won, and the name that we left for ourselves. Okay, in any case, the verse is very clear that those people say there is nothing. And then the Quran asks them, if you believe that there is nothing, and that nothing happens after you die and there is no afterlife, then you need to provide evidence for this. Otherwise, you do not, but they do not have any knowledge of that. They only make conjectures. This is only conjecture. This is only guesswork. Verse 38:27, we did not create the sky and the earth and whatever is between them in vain. That is the conjecture or the assumption or the guesswork of the disbelievers. So they say all of this exists. Why? For no reason. It just does. Woe to the disbelievers of the fire. This is just guesswork. Verse 45:32. And when it was said to those people who deny, Allah's promise is indeed true, and there is no doubt about the hour, so the hour of Yawm al-Qiyamah basically, you said, we do not know what the hour is. We know nothing beyond conjectures, and we do not possess any certainty. And is this not what we hear nowadays? When you try to get to the bottom of something and you try to reach a truth, a certainty about something, so many of the people out there, unfortunately, even within our religion and within our community, sometimes say there are things that are not known and we can never get to the bottom of them. Well, these big items, so your belief in Allah and your belief in prophethood and your belief in the afterlife and imamah and the Qur'an and these parts of your faith, you need to reach certainty about them. You cannot live with doubt and uncertainty about those. The Qur'an rejects that. You're not being a human being when you do that. You're living in doubt, and the Qur'an says living in conjecture and doubt has no value. You need to reach the truth in those things. Do not claim and do not say these are things we can never know the truth about or become agnostic. This is rejected by the Qur'an. You can live in doubt if it's a transition. You doubt things and then you get to the bottom of them afterwards. Okay? So that's why the Holy Qur'an says, and those people used to say it, so they're going to be reminded of this in the afterlife. In this world, they used to say, we do not know what the hour is. We don't know what's the afterlife. We don't know what's awaiting us. We know nothing but conjectures, and we do not possess any certainty. And this, I think, applies to a lot of people who take the philosophical doubt a little bit too seriously, and they want to apply it to everything, even with things that clearly should amount to a conclusion on which you can build your life. And so sometimes when you look at all of this, you say, well, how can a human being that is supposed to be logical, rational, who prides themselves on using their intellect and using their intelligence and their faculties in order to reach the truth, how can they allow themselves to build their life around something so baseless as conjecture and guesswork and not knowing and being okay with that? And this is a very serious question. And here, two very quick answers can be given. The first one is, sometimes as a human being, all you need or all you want and you're really looking for is to do as you please. You live based on your own desires. You have your own plan for the way you want to live. You want to be unrestricted. You want to be unbound. You don't want to be limited, tied down. You don't want things outside of your desires to dictate all of those things. And so allowing yourself to go towards those conjectural versions of the world works out a lot better for you that way. And so long as you're not bound by, if you follow a certain logic, you may end up somewhere that is then going to force you to adopt a certain behavior and to live in a certain way. And because you never want to go there, you just close off that door. And you pretend as though you have a good reason for not going there, but really there's a psychological blockage that is, I want to live the way I want to live. I want to live based on my desires. I don't want to live based on what, anything outside of me is going to dictate on me. That's one. And I think this is a very, very important factor nowadays. That's one. And the second one is that, generally speaking, and this applies to all human beings, even the best among us. This is going to apply to anyone. If a human being starts being exposed to misguidance and they do nothing about it, if they actually are the ones performing, if they are misguided, or if they are conducting, embarking on a sin, they are the ones committing a certain sin or exposing themselves to a certain type of thought, the more you expose yourself to that, the more familiar this becomes to you. Even things that in the past may have had a shock value to you, even things to which you may have been sensitive to before, You become desensitized. You lose that sensitivity, right? And this is, I think, something that we've all experienced in life. You familiarize yourself with something, and then it loses its punch. You lose a sensitivity towards that thing. And this applies to the belief system as well. And when you come to look at it from the point of view of guidance and misguidance, what you basically get is that you've gone so far in misguidance that you've kind of went beyond the point of no return. And we never want to present things as though they are a hopeless case. There are no hopeless cases, except that there are people who are making it clear that no matter what you are going to be presenting to them, they are never going to accept it. They tell you that point blank. And sometimes they don't say it with words. Sometimes their actions show that. And you know, we've talked about this when we said there are people who earn their punishment in this world. This is based on this. When all hope is lost for them that they are ever going to come back, they've basically waged an open war against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are defiant of Allah. They are defiant of religion. They are defiant of this divine blessing or mercy or guidance. They don't want to have anything to do with it. They're not interested in it. No matter what you do, they're not interested in that. Those people, the further they live and the further they go, the more they are going to be moving in that opposite direction to guidance. And you see that very clearly in the Holy Quran. So you wonder, how is it that someone is not seeing the truth? Look at what these verses are saying. So in verses 30:10, it says, then the end result of those who committed misdeeds, so the final outcome of those who committed misdeeds was that they denied the signs of Allah. They did so many misdeeds, they committed so many sins that they're no longer able to accept something as being a sign of Allah. And because, as the Quran says, and because they used to mock them. You mocked them so much, and you did so many sins and so many misdeeds that you're no longer able to even see something as being a sign of Allah. In another verse, so this is verses 10 to 15, Surah Al-Mutaffifin 83, it says, woe on that day to the deniers, those who deny the day of retribution. And then the Quran is going to explain to us how come their end result was that they would deny the day of retribution, Yawm ad-Din. Why? And none denies it except every sinful transgressor. When our signs are recited to them, he says, myths of the ancients. No, indeed, rather, rust has accumulated on their hearts from what they used to earn. So this could be symbolic, anything you do, or it could be the actual money that they used to get. No, indeed, they will truly be veiled from the Lord on that day. So when you understand hell as being away from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can't say that Allah is the one who puts someone in hell. It's those people are the ones who are going in that direction. They are screening themselves off from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the end, those people will openly tell you, as we said, in a lot of cases, they will refuse to let go of certain beliefs, no matter what you present. And they will be open with that. Notice how this verse in the Quran presents their objection or their denial of the afterlife. 1638, it says, they have sworn by Allah with solemn oaths that Allah will not resurrect those who die. Yes, indeed, and see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to their promise and their oath. Yes, indeed, it is a promise binding upon him, but most people do not know. And this is where you see that there's an open confrontation here. You're openly confronting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and defying him. Well, then get ready, because when you defy Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of the heavens and the earth and everything in them with his might and power, then you have to be ready for the consequences. So, if we continue with this line of thinking, the Holy Quran is basically telling us that when you look at those who, at the logic of those who have denied that there is a resurrection and an afterlife, it's based on two things. One, it's very weak logic where there is a logic, and we're going to see examples of that. And two, as we saw, that it is simply unlikely. Every time we talk about the afterlife or resurrection, they say it doesn't sound like this is something likely to happen, that we would actually be brought back from the dead, that we would actually be resurrected after we were dead. It's just unlikely. Okay, so now we're going to see how the Quran deals with this. So as for the weakness in their logic, see what the Quran says. They say, what? We have become bones and dust. Shall we really be raised in a new creation? So this is a big objection. So if that you have become bones and dust, if your body has decomposed, then resurrection is impossible. So the Quran basically considers this a very weak argument. Say, should you be stones or iron, or a creation more fantastic or more difficult to resurrect to your minds? Whatever you think is more difficult, why do you stop at bones and dust? So that's why the Quran says, should you be stones or iron or a creation more fantastic to your minds? Yeah. In other words, this is a part that's not said in the verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still raise you back. This is not enough of an argument. You're not showing that this is impossible. You're just saying that this is unlikely. Bones and dust. So the Quran replies by saying, even if you are stones and even if you are made of iron, you will still be resurrected. They will say, who will bring us back? Say, he who originated you the first time. And with this simplicity, the Quran dismisses their entire argument and shows how weak it is. In another verse, 37, in chapter 37, verses 51, 53, it says, one of them will say, and this is Surah As-Saffat, these are beautiful verses, you could go back and look at them. SubhanAllah, and there, the Quran starts to basically giving you a picture, a live picture of what's happening after people are entering heaven and hell. And it talks about the people who have entered into heaven. And then, you're so distracted and preoccupied with yourself and with your judgment and with your actions. And am I going to enter or not? And then finally they made it into heaven. And then the Quran describes, the pleasures and the peace and that is awaiting those people in heaven. And then it says, and then they start talking with each other. And one of them says, and this is where this verse starts, and one of them says, one of them will say, indeed, I had a close companion, kana li qareen, someone who was kind of your best friend, someone who never left your side and you never left their side, someone very close. So this is now someone who is sitting in heaven and he is remembering, because now he's no longer distracted by the day of judgment. He's made it to heaven and now he's remembering, and he says, indeed, I had a close companion who would say, are you really among those who affirm this belief, who really believe that there's an afterlife? That when we are dead and have become dust and bones, that we shall indeed be brought to retribution? And so the verses continue, and they say that he starts looking and then he sees him in hell. Okay, so, I invite you to go back and read those verses. They're really worth looking and pondering. And then other verses, 44, and again, see, so this is basically the entire claim, is that companion, two people who were together. And this is why Yawm al-Qiyamah is described as a day of hasra, a day of regret. Everybody wishes that they had done a little bit more. Everybody wishes that, they had not done a sin, or if they did good things, that they had done more of them. And look at those people, they were together. Someone that you were with, and wal'ayadhu billah, suddenly you find yourself in hell, and you see that person that you were with in heaven, for something as simple as they decided to live their life in a certain way and hold certain beliefs, and you rejected those. Okay? Anyways, 44 verses 34 to 36, chapter 44, it says, indeed, though these ones say, the ones with the Holy Prophet, these ones say, it is nothing but our first death, or a single death, and we shall not be resurrected. And if you're telling the truth, bring our fathers back, should you be truthful. So this is their entire argument. Our entire argument is that there's only one life, and then we die. And if you're telling the truth that we come back to life, then bring back our forefathers, so that we see that people actually rise back from the dead. And and some commentators have said that this was Abu Jahl who used to tell that to the Holy Prophet. He used to tell them, bring back Qais to the Holy Prophet. Qais was the great grandfather of the Holy Prophet. He tells them, bring back Qais. Qais was a truthful man. So in other words, he's going to tell us what actually happens after we die. Bring him back, and if you don't, therefore there is no resurrection and there is no afterlife. So in this way, we see that the Quran considers the actual proofs lack of proofs, and that where there is a logic, that logic is very weak. So how does the Quran deal with this? As we saw, layer one or part one of the strategy was to show that there is no argument. Now, the second part of the strategy is to flip the equation and say, let's start looking at this world and let's start looking at examples. And if we can show that there are examples that of resurrection, things that are similar in resurrection that you have encountered, that you know about, then the likelihood that this is a possibility suddenly increases a lot, depending on the examples provided. Okay, and then of course after that the response to the objections, and after that the counterattack. So the arguments of the Holy Quran to say, one, this is a divine promise, and two, that there are actually logical, rational reasons to believe that it's not only possible, but that it is necessary to have resurrection and to have an afterlife. The first example given by the Holy Quran is the life of the plants, as called by the author. So we know when we look at the life of a human being, we see that they were nothing and then they are something. And this is looked at with an analogy from the Holy Quran as simply the cycle of death and life and death and life happening again and again. So the Holy Quran invites human beings to study nature, to look at nature, to look at the cycle of life and death, to look at the cycle of the seasons and the changes that occur in nature. Study them, understand them, and say, why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have given us this type of world to witness and to see constantly? Why is he doing that? The verses of the Quran explain that. They say part of the reason why this world is created in this way, so that you're constantly exposed to a miniature form of what we refer to as the resurrection of the afterlife. And the reason why we fail to see this as the powerful argument that it is because it is so much around us. We've become so accustomed to it, so familiar with it, that it's lost its punch. Nature and the revival and the cycle of life and death in nature, we see it so much around us that we kind of neglect it and ignore it because it's always there. And so what the Holy Quran tries to do is to turn our attention back to it, to reawaken our senses to it, and to see it for the miracle that it really is, and then to use that as a miniature example for the resurrection. Okay, so there are so many verses in the Quran here. I just chose two very quickly. One of them in chapter 30, verse 50. It says, contemplate the imprints or the traces or the effects of Allah's mercy. انظر إلى آثار رحمة الله. How he gives life to the earth after its death. So this is one of the examples of the mercy of Allah that is everywhere. And this is the part that we neglect. We live in this world, we go on in our daily lives, we fail to see the miracle in everything. This is the traces that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, contemplate, انظر إلى آثار رحمة الله. The imprints of Allah's mercy, how he gives life to the earth after its death. Indeed, the same will give life back to the dead, for he has power over all things. That's one verse. And a human being who is rational and objective can use that without anything else, and that would suffice for them to understand the resurrection of the afterlife. Another verse, and notice the logic, okay? This is how we have to learn from the Holy Quran how to build our logic. Notice every part and how it's an argument in itself, and it builds on the argument, on the overall argument. O people, if you are in doubt about the resurrection, consider that we indeed created you from dust, then from a drop of seminal fluid, then from a clinging mass, then from a fleshy tissue, partly formed and partly unformed, so that we may manifest our power to you. We establish in the wombs whatever we wish for a specified term, then we bring you forth as infants. Then we rear you so that you may come of age. Then there are some of you who are taken away, and there are some of you who are relegated to the nethermost age, so that he knows nothing after having possessed some knowledge. And you see the earth lifeless, yet when we send down water upon it, it stirs and swells and grows every delightful kind. That is because Allah is the truth, and it is He who revives the dead, and He has power over all things. a verse like this is basically summarizing the cycle of nature for us. And it's telling us, if you notice this, it's because Allah put it there for you to notice, so that you see, as the verse says, and we send down water upon the earth so that it stirs and swells and grows. That is because Allah is the truth, and it is He who revives the dead. That's the reason why we're talking about this, and that's the reason why we created it in this way for you. In the next verse, in the next part that we want to look at, a second type of argument, a second type of verses, for instance, the story of the people of the cave. And now this is a fascinating story. We don't have time to go through it right now. I'm almost out of time. Go back to Surah Al-Kahf, verses 9 to 26, to read that story. In short, in summary, a group of young men who in their time wanted to believe Allah and to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the way that they thought was pure and original, which was most likely, based on commentary, most likely the original Christianity, the format of Christianity. The problem is that in their land where they lived, they could not do that because the king of the time, or the ruler of the time, they were imposing on the people to worship partners and not, allowing them to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as they should. So separately, they ran away from those people in that land, and they met on the way. And then when they started telling each other their stories, they saw that they all had run away from the same thing and trying to escape this oppression in their religious faith and worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like they want. So they end up running away, escaping. They find the cave and they enter into the cave. The punchline here for us is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that He put them to sleep. When they went to sleep, He put them to sleep, as the Holy Qur'an says, for 300 plus 9 years. So, 309 years, or as some commentators have said, for instance, 300 solar years, 309 lunar years, or perhaps other interpretations. In any case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the dwellers, the people of the cave, they were between 3 and perhaps 7 men, young men. They went to sleep for 300 years, for 3 centuries. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought them back to their awakened state. And they actually did not know that they had slept for that long. And they went on trying to, they took money. One of them had money. He went and tried to buy something good for them to eat. And that's when the people saw them and they saw the people, and they realized that this is a completely different world from the one in which they were when they escaped and went to sleep. Okay, so the Holy Quran tells us, why is the Holy Quran telling us this story? 1. 2, why is the Holy Quran saying, why did this happen in the first place? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put these people to sleep in this manner for 300 years? What is the point of all of this? And the verse in the Quran in Surah Al-Kahf, verse 21, it gives us the conclusion of all of this, or a big part of it for us. Thus did we make their case known to the people, for them and for the people, that they might know that the promise of Allah is truth. 1. So that they themselves, if they ever had any doubt, they will see the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That they realize, oh my God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put us to sleep. We've slept for this long. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown them how He has protected them from those people that were oppressing them. And that's why He kept them in this place for this long. That makes them realize, and it adds their faith. But then, for everyone else, for the people who encountered them, and for us who are reading their story in the Holy Quran, and that there can be no doubt about the hour of judgment. There can be no doubt about Yawm al-Qiyamah. If you understand their story and believe in it, if you're a follower of the Quran, if you understand the story, then you cannot have any doubt that there's a resurrection. It's no more difficult, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, for Allah to put these people to sleep 300 years and then bring them back, than it is to resurrect and create an afterlife for us. And then, so if you understand this, 1, you understand that there is no unlikelihood. It's as likely, if not more, for us to believe in the resurrection than it is to believe in the people of the cave, the dwellers of the cave. And then secondly, there's the whole analogy with sleep. And I don't want to spend too much time on this. I think we talked about it a couple of lectures ago, when we talked about sleep being a minor death. In fact, it is a death. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He takes back the souls when they sleep, but He returns to some of them and He keeps some of them. Then we refer to it as death. Those souls have not been returned, right? And so there's definitely an analogy. And for us as followers of the Qur'an and of this religion, we need to see ourselves when we go to sleep as what it really is. We are going to die every night and coming back to life every day. Now you may use that in every which way you want. Use that as this is your second chance coming back to life. Use that as the miracle that keeps reminding you that death is always close. Therefore, don't forget that and work fast and work hard. Life is short. Life is fragile. You're going to death every night and coming back to life with the grace of Allah, with the bounty of Allah. And if you read some of the invocations, the prayers of the morning, there's a mention of this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought me, has blessed me back with another day, has given me back another day, has added one day to my life. Why? Because this is a miracle that is happening, but again, we're so accustomed and familiar to it that it has lost its ability to really shock us and make us aware of how miraculous it is for us. And then finally, with verses like these in the Holy Quran, we see that, yes, there is a natural order to the world. That's not the issue. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a world that science is always exploring, and we're trying to find what the laws of nature are, and so on and so forth. But there's also more. There is also a God who is all-powerful, who is the creator of this world, and who controls every part of it. And these stories in the Holy Quran and that we encounter in our daily lives should serve as a reminder that as much as we want to rely on the day-to-day natural material order of things, there is more going on, and we never know when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is intervening around us and in our lives. This is something to keep in mind, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is closer to us than, removing ourselves and hiding behind this layer that we want to call the natural order of things. There is divine power and divine knowledge and divine will in action all the time. Quickly, again, the Holy Quran also tells us, as another example, that some animals were brought back to death, from the dead. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has resurrected a number of animals, and we are no different in body than animals. So if the animals are being brought back, they are being resurrected, then it's not more difficult for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to resurrect us. And if we see it and if we believe in it, then we should be able to apply it to ourselves as well, right? And so there are two cases mentioned, and one of them is the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show him how he raises the people back from the dead. That's one. And two, the story of the person, the one who is a servant of Allah, who goes through a town and whose donkey is resurrected. And this is mentioned in the next part. Okay, so in this one, a very quick remark. And this applies to all the prophets. And we've talked about this, but just in case, because we're about to read the verse, don't forget that there are infinite layers of knowledge with very different categories of knowledge. If I tell you there is something called a fire and I describe it to you, and if I theoretically explain to you what fire is so that you create a mental image of it, and if I bring you somewhere where you can see a fire from far, and if I take you a lot closer to that fire, to the point where you start feeling the heat and you start seeing how it burns things, and then you put your hand in the fire and you actually get burned by the fire, these are not all the same level of knowledge. These are different types and levels and degrees of your awareness of fire. In the first case, you only had an ambiguous, kind of fuzzy, blurry, mental image of what fire is. And in the last instance, you had an actual experience of what burning of the fire and the heat of the fire is. When the prophets ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for certain things, what they're asking for is simply a higher degree of knowledge, a more experiential kind of knowledge. It's not that they don't believe. It's not that their belief system or their worldview is mistaken or lacking. The issue is those prophets are always looking for more. They're perfecting themselves to the highest degree they can, and the degrees are infinite, and they know this. So Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in verse 260 in Surah Al-Baqarah, he says, when Ibrahim said, "My Lord, show me how you revive the dead." He said, "Do you not believe?" He said, "Yes, indeed, but in order that my heart may be at rest." He said, "Take 4 of the birds, then cut them into pieces." We're told in some of the narrations, I'll mention a commentary a little bit after, then cut them into pieces and place a part of them on every mountain, then call them, they will come to you hastening. And know that Allah is Almighty, All-Wise. That's the summary. And some commentators have mentioned, for instance, that the 4 birds were a peacock, a crow, a pigeon, and a rooster. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Ibrahim alayhi salam, who had asked for this, kind of like a miracle, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked him to cut up those 4 birds and to mix all of their parts, the body parts of these dead birds now, mix them up completely together so that they're completely unrecognizable, and then take a bunch and a part of that mixture and place it on mountaintops. So scatter them and spread them. In some narrations we're told over 10 mountains. And then come back and call them. You call them. It's not Allah who's raising them back. You, Ibrahim, you can call them, and they will bring them back to this world, to life, based on your call. So that Ibrahim alayhi salam experiences bringing the dead back to life himself. This is not a theoretical understanding like you and I have. This is Ibrahim alayhi salam raising the dead. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving to Ibrahim based on his request. And it's an experiential type of knowledge. Now, the second point I wanted to add here, so if you believe in the Qur'an and if you believe in the truthfulness of what the Holy Prophet says and the Qur'an says, then this is another argument that these animals are coming back to life, and us coming back to life is not more difficult than that. The nuance I wanted to quickly maybe mention here is that if we want to be very meticulous in the way we understand this verse, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam does not seem to be asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show him how he brings the dead from their death into life again. It seems a little bit more nuanced. Ibrahim alayhi salam seems to be asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about an objection that we'll get to in later lessons, maybe in next lesson or later lessons, where you have entities that die and their bodies decompose and go into other entities, into, let's say, other living entities. And so that thing that was eaten, because in the narrations we're told what Ibrahim alayhi salam noticed initially was that there was a carcass, and the carcass was being eaten by all sorts of different predators. And this made him think about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to bring this carcass back. And then he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show him how it's actually done. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave that to him, accepted his prayer and showed it to him by allowing him to do it himself. So the objection or the question or the request, however you may want to call it, is not necessarily about just seeing how the dead come back to life. It's when something, the body of a living entity, decomposes, is spread, is scattered across, time and space into other entities, that it becomes part of their bodies and so on and so forth, as we shall see when we talk about that objection. Then how is that process of resurrection actually occurring? How does that take place in the afterlife? And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed to Ibrahim. This is a side note, but I think it's a relevant one to mention. The fourth example that we see in the Holy Quran is beyond the plants and beyond the people of the cave and beyond the animals being resurrected. The Holy Quran mentions a number of different instances in which people were actually raised back from the dead. They were resurrected. The first one is the famous story, verse 259 in Surah Al-Baqarah. Commentators have mentioned, and we have that in some narrations, that this is Prophet Uzair or another of the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is not someone who's objecting. This is someone who was thinking about this topic. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him this, once again, experiential knowledge of how the resurrection of the dead actually takes place. So let's read the verse quickly, or take the example of the one who passed by a town all in ruins to its roofs. He said, "Oh, how shall Allah ever bring it back to life after its death? So Allah caused him to die for 100 years, then raised him back again. He said, and in the narrations we're told, he heard a voice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the angels, for instance, he revealed to him, communicated with him. How long did you remain thus? He said, perhaps a day or a part of a day. Because in the narrations we're told, when he came, and the last thing he remembered was in the morning, at the beginning of the day. And when he woke up, it was towards the end of the day, was evening. And so he thought, a part of a day. What he didn't know is that this just was 100 years, except that it happened in the beginning of the day and the end of the day. He said, nay, rather you have remained thus 100 years. But look at your food and your drink. They show no signs of age. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, miraculously, to show him both sides, he kept him alive and intact for 100 years. And he kept his food. And we are told that it was grapes and figs and other things that should rot very quickly. They go bad, they perish very quickly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept them intact, preserved during this whole time to show him both sides. Okay? So look at your food and your drink, they show no signs of age. And look at your donkey, that we may make of you a sign to the people. Look at the bones, how we bring them back together and clothe them with flesh. When this was shown clearly to him, he said, I know that Allah has power over all things. Now, this was not a theoretical knowledge. This is because he experienced it and others saw, and he went and told them about it. And so this becomes a sign for others and for us too, that we are being told about this. Verses 55, 56 in Surah Al-Baqarah, we are told about the story of the people of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And here Bani Israel basically told Musa at some point, they don't want to believe him anymore, because they're not sure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually talking to him. If he is telling the truth, then they want to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. And he told them, you're asking for something foolish. They insisted. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Musa alayhi salam, choose 70. So they chose 70 of their men. It's not necessarily even those men who were saying this. Okay, it could have been their best or their worshippers or their scholars. 70 people were chosen from the people of Musa alayhi salam to go with him to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for Allah to show himself. And Prophet Musa alayhi salam prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we have this verse, these verses of the Qur'an that tell us what happened. And when you said, Bani Israel, when you said, O Moses, we will not believe you until we see Allah visibly. Thereupon a thunderbolt seized you as you looked on. Then we raised you up after your death, so that you might give thanks. And here, we don't know what happened. All we know is they died. Something happened and they died. And if this is the exact same story, because commentators differ here, where, we're told that this is the 70 men, they went with Musa, they looked, it could have been something, that had a spark or a light or a sound or, a nuclear explosion, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to show them that you can't see something, but you can see its trace. And its trace was enough to kill you all. And then I brought you back to life. And Prophet Musa alayhi salam asked for God's forgiveness for even asking for this. Okay, because he knows what they're asking for. Still, they asked for it. He felt obliged. He's trying to guide his people. So all of them died, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought them back to life. So this is a story well known by Bani Israel. The Holy Quran reminds them of this. When you killed a soul, again, talking to Bani Israel, there are people, someone, we are told in the narrations, perhaps and perhaps not, the story remains the same. Most likely someone killed someone else to try to inherit them. They were very wealthy. We are told it was even someone who was part of their family, an uncle or a cousin. So that person killed, and then there was no way of knowing who killed. And this is the story of the cow, Surah Al-Baqarah. The chapter is actually named after this story. We're going to spare you the details of their stubbornness about killing the cow. Okay, so every time Musa alayhi salam instructed them on what to do, they started inventing excuses. Do you have to tell us what type of cow it is? And sometimes we do that too. Okay, so we don't leave good enough, as it is, good enough as it is. We poke and we ask and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it more difficult for them, because they were trying to find excuses not to do it. And so in the end, they were asked to go find a cow that was very unique. and they had to pay a huge price for it. But then the result is that they took the bones of that cow and they hit the body of that deceased, and he came back to life. And he told them exactly who killed him and how and why, and then he went back to his state of being dead. So the Holy Quran summarizes all of this and tells us, and when you killed the soul and accused one another about it, and Allah was to expose whatever you were concealing, we said, strike him with a piece of it, a piece of the cow. Thus does Allah revive the dead, and He shows you His signs so that you may apply reason. And then finally, we have the many reports, whether it is in the Holy Quran or even outside of the Holy Quran, of the miracles performed by Prophet Isa alayhi salam. And we mentioned those because they are so well known and so famously reported. One of the verses of the Quran says, the miracles of the Prophet, when he says, Prophet Isa, when he talks about himself, he says, I have certainly brought you a sign from your Lord. I will create for you out of clay the form of a bird, then I will breathe into it, and it will become a bird by Allah's permission. And then he mentions his other miracles, such as the healing of the people who are sick. And then he says, and I revive the dead by Allah's permission. So when this was happening, and he became famous for this, and until today, 2,000 years after Prophet Jesus alayhi salam, we are still reading and hearing and reading about the reports of him raising people back from the dead. And so this is how famous he had become for raising people back from the dead, as another example mentioned in the Holy Quran. So all of this for us should be clear in that we have established the existence of Allah, we have established prophethood, we have established the authenticity of the prophethood of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we've established the authenticity of the Holy Quran. With all of this, when we put it together, then we come to the verses of the Quran, and these become scriptural evidence, more scriptural evidence for the validity of the resurrection and the afterlife. So with this, we've completed this part of our discussion on the resurrection and how the Quran presents the topic of the resurrection. And the next part is going to be how the Holy Quran is going to present the objections of those who deny, and what is going to be the Quranic answer to them. That's the next. And then what is going to be the counterattack, where the Holy Quran is going to present its own arguments for the not only possibility but necessity of the resurrection and the afterlife. And with this, we have run out of time. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآله